Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to untangle a piece of history that is as fascinating as it is deeply tragic. We're taking a really close look at the complex, dual-natured origin of the Taliban. By digging into our source material, we're going to see how a movement that actually started out of a desperate need for local order ended up getting totally wrapped up in external geopolitical ambitions. It's really a story of a grassroots reaction colliding head-on with state-sponsored proxy warfare.
So, here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll kick things off with the post-Soviet power vacuum, then look at the emergence of the students and Pakistan's strategic motives. After that, we'll unpack the ISI and militant proxies, and finally, we'll confront the human cost of it all.
Section 1. The Post-Soviet Power Vacuum, Chaos and Warlordism.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp where this movement came from, we've got to rewind to 1989 and look at the totally lawless state of Afghanistan. After a decade of brutal fighting, the Soviet Union pulled its troops out, which just left this massive, gaping power vacuum. By 1992, a vicious civil war had broken out among the different Mujahideen factions who had originally fought the Soviets, and it was right out of this intense anarchy that the Taliban first showed up in the southern Kandahar province around late 1994. From there, they rapidly swept across the country, capturing the capital, Kabul, by 1996.
The conditions on the ground back then? Just unimaginable. You had a complete collapse of state structures, meaning absolutely no law enforcement. The former Mujahideen warlords basically carved the whole country up into their own personal fiefdoms. Highway robbery and extortion were everywhere, completely paralyzing trade. And honestly, worse still, the civilian population faced horrific atrocities, including kidnapping and rape. Every day, rural Afghans were just so exhausted by the corruption and cruelty, they were absolutely desperate for any semblance of order and security.
Section 2. Emergence of the students, the grassroots reaction.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the initial local response. It completely reframes how we understand the Taliban's roots. We hear the word Taliban, and we immediately associate it with foreign influence. But the term Talib literally just means student, and a hudra is a local village religious school or dormitory, which is deeply, deeply integrated into the Afghan community. Our sources highlight that a huge majority of the early core leadership of the Taliban were actually educated right there in these local Afghan hudras before 1979, not just sitting in Pakistani refugee camps. These were local guys, many of them former Mujahideen fighters themselves, who basically banded together to restore Islamic order against the sheer chaos of the warlords.
And this brings us to a huge historical debate. On one side, you have this indigenous view arguing the Taliban was an authentic, grassroots Afghan reaction driven by people just wanting peace and strict Islamic governance. But the proxy view argues the exact opposite, that the movement was essentially manufactured and launched by Pakistani intelligence to serve their own external interests. Well, the reality, as the sources show us, is that it's a really complex mix of both. It was an indigenous movement that got rapidly co-opted and hypercharged by foreign patronage.
Section 3. Pakistan's strategic motives, the search for influence.
So while the initial spark was absolutely local, the fuel that turned the Taliban into a massive national force came straight from Islamabad. To understand why Pakistan intervened so heavily in the emergence of the Taliban, we have to look at their core military doctrine, strategic depth. Following the loss of East Pakistan back in 1971, Pakistani strategists firmly believed that to counter what they saw as an existential threat from rival India, they needed a completely secure rear area. And that meant ensuring a friendly, compliant government was installed right next door in Kabul.
Under Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, Pakistan's strategic goals became super specific. They really wanted to secure overland trade routes to those newly independent Central Asian markets, especially a very lucrative natural gas pipeline coming from Turkmenistan. To pull that off, they needed those Afghan highways cleared of extortionist warlords. They also wanted to install a pro-Pakistan government, crush any Pashtun nationalism along their shared border, and, most importantly, completely block India from getting any kind of economic or political foothold in Afghanistan.
There's a quote from Major General Nasrullah Babar, who was Pakistan's interior minister at the time, that just hits the nail on the head. He was heavily involved in organizing early trial trade convoys, and he openly referred to the Taliban as, quote, my boys. It vividly shows the highly paternalistic, proprietary attitude the Pakistani state held toward the insurgents. They literally viewed them as instruments of their own national policy.
Section 4. The ISI and militant proxies, escalation and co-optation.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because the main engine for achieving this strategic depth was Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. They didn't just sit back and watch the Taliban grow, they actively escalated their support to transform them from a local militia into a formidable national army. It started small, trial trade convoys, some initial field shipments, but it quickly snowballed into massive payouts of cash, heavy weapons, and vehicles. The ISI brokered key alliances with other warlords, provided a high-level combat intelligence, and even sent their own military advisors to give direct tactical support right there on the ground.
And the sheer scale of this infiltration is honestly staggering. This quote comes from an active Afghan insurgent commander interviewed in our source material. He flat out says that the ISI has people working directly for it inside the Taliban movement, calling it clearer than the sun in the sky. So sure, the rank-and-file fighters might have been Afghan, but a massive chunk of operational control was completely dominated by foreign intelligence.
And the demands the ISI placed on these proxy commanders, absolutely devastating for Afghanistan's everyday life. Insurgent commanders actually recount being ordered by the ISI to deliberately burn down community schools, just to keep children uneducated, and to systematically assassinate local tribal elders and religious clerics who wouldn't play ball. They were even told to blow up bridges on the Kabul-Kandahar highway just to keep the region destabilized. And if an Afghan commander refused, they faced dismissal or, frankly, assassination by the ISI.
To manage all this, the ISI nurtured a really complex web of militant proxies, with each group serving a totally different function. The core Taliban coming out of the south was used for the main national insurgency and to secure those trade routes. Then you had the Haqqani network in the southeast functioning as a more covert tool for high-profile operations and suicide bombings. They were deeply integrated with former ISI officials, and groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba were suspected to share regional terror operations. It was a massive, highly coordinated proxy war architecture.
Section 5. The human cost. A nation caught in the crossfire. So, the crucial point is this. We've talked a lot about grand strategy and intelligence maneuvers, but what did this actually mean for the Afghan people on the ground? Well, take a look at this staggering number, 1 million. Over the course of the Soviet invasion and the foreign-fueled civil wars that followed, an estimated 1 million Afghans lost their lives. To put that into perspective, for a nation of about 17 million at the time, that is just an unimaginable loss.
And the nightmare didn't end with the death toll. 5 million. That's 5 million ordinary Afghan citizens who were displaced, forced to pack up their lives and seek refuge, primarily over the borders into Pakistan and Iran. You literally had whole generations of Afghans growing up in refugee camps, completely disconnected from their homeland's traditional culture and social structures.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate tragedy of this whole history. The Afghan people who were initially so desperate for an end to the warlords' violence that they welcomed a movement promising peace, ended up becoming victims themselves. They were basically held hostage in their own country, stripped of basic human rights, forced under extreme restrictions, and just treated as disposable pawns in Pakistan's brutal quest for strategic death.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought. We've seen exactly how genuine grassroots trauma was manipulated by external intelligence agencies to totally reshape a country's destiny. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. What are the ultimate long-term consequences for a nation when its people, its infrastructure, and its very future are continually used as pawns for a neighbor's strategic depth? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really encourage you to keep questioning and keep exploring.